Hubble huggers, you're the one. You make aerospace all so fun. Hubble huggers, you're the one. You make astronomy all so fun. Shades, you're always the first. How are you? Hi. Hello. Greetings, fellow Hubble huggers. How's it going? How are you doing? Howdy doody. The stream today was so good. Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'll do a little summary of that. I'll also push people over that way. Uh, yeah, a bunch of cool things about that stream I wanted to bring up today, which is why I called it denying the mind, denial of mind, because I saw further insight about all of this stuff. Love your Dawkins.
Thank you. Well, that's not a novel. Eh? Biology. Yeah. Yes.
The violin short. Yeah, that was all. That was all Ryan. So, what is it? Let me. Oh, I wanted to mention a book. I just got this book, but it's looking very promising. It's called The Myth of Religious Neutrality, and it's an essay on the hidden roles of religious belief. And basically, in short, and most of us know this already, but there's no philosophy or worldview that's absent of some underlying pure faith presupposition. So everyone's basically a presuppositionalist, and that the reason it's the myth of neutrality is that you basically start from a non-neutral position about all things, because all positions assume absolute truth, that there's some binding unity of truth. Otherwise, you're just making sounds. So the hold on a second. Am I still there? Can you get more into the empirical evidence? I'm not sure what you're regarding. Here, Aaron CB. Howdy. How does one get an invite to the Discord? Oh, I'll DM me on Instagram maybe, or I'll put it, because the Discord invites are temporary and they basically go away. So I'll just, yeah. If you figure out, am I on Twitter? No, I don't really do Twitter. I don't like Twitter. What was I getting into? All right, that there's no neutrality, because neutrality assumes that there's no real absolute binding force mind uh, in all things that holds together the unity between absolute things and particulars, that such that there's intelligibility to begin with, but further that there's the ability the ability to discern and navigate those particulars and absolutes, like I was discussing today with David Patrick Harry on Church of Eternal Logos. Without a grounding mind being that serves as the absolute unifier of absolutes and particulars, you basically fall into what's similar to the metaverse, where if the universe is absolute, in the materialist view, oh, the universe is just eternal and absolute, and everything inside of it is our particulars, and everything's inside of that system. Well, as soon as you argue the potentiality of another universe, suddenly universes themselves are no longer absolutes. They are themselves particulars. It's like fractals. And so there's no way around this problem other than an absolute eternal. And I say being or mind because these are all concepts and these are all reflective. We don't navigate these concepts independent of our mind, independent of language, words, laws of logic, philosophy, epistemology, morality, ethics, um, metaphysics. And that's why everything we do in pursuit of knowledge borrows from what structurally represents a mind. It's not just like abstract kind of like a mind. It's everything that we borrow to make any arguments at all or any pursuit of knowledge or any claims. All of those things that we borrow are actually concepts, conceptual. The question is whether they're um, made up or not. That's the only real options. If you deny that they have a source and a mind distinct from our mind, then they're made up and they're human conventions. And if they're human conventions, then the consequence of logic being a human convention would be that there's no real truth, that we're just babbling, that it's just sounds and buzzing, and we're just doing it for an effect. That our argumentation and arguing and persuasion and talking about stuff and getting to the root of the matter, and you know these are all just effects, just physical effects, like like physics, like in uh natural physics. And so but that's absurdity, because if that were the case, we can change these conventions like laws of logic, and of course we can't. And if truth was a convention, we could change the truth, which we can't. And so we're left looking toward what justifies truth existing in the first place. And you realize that, wow, that makes a lot of sense. What doesn't make sense is a naturalistic view that all of these concepts emerge out of nature. They don't. we we can call our brain natural, the hardware, but we're not interacting with anything physical. People really have I'm talking to this guy on one of the comments section, and I was like, "Dude, information's not physical." And he was like, "Yeah, it is." "Oh, you're gonna tell me information's not physical? Look at this book. Just look at a book." A book is physical. The ink that's used to uh, be placed on the page is physical. The but the characters and their meaning and the information being relayed is not physical. And we know this because you could take a couple of words that's printed with ink on a book, in a book, and you could take a couple of twigs and write the same thing in the dirt, and the information will be the same, and the medium are different, meaning the medium in this case are not identical to the information. And so you can't find information in nature. We're already interacting with supernatural metaphysical things. They're not exactly objects. They're not exactly they're not they're conceptual, but they're not imaginary. And so these are all really important points of contention with the atheistic view, the naturalist view, the materialist view. And they're really effective because they have to admit that from their worldview that not all things actually are physical. So it already puts their starting position in a corner where they have to sort of concede. They have to say, well, all things are physical that we then get to interact with once we assume all of these other immaterial things that we use. And so we discussed that a little bit, but it eventually got to the point of the mind and what our mind is, and how our mind is a reflection of our creator's mind, and we're given laws of logic and reasoning, not so we can figure out what a tree is, and and figure out the magic and the nature and the worldliness information and truths about the world. That's helpful, but the point is we were given that to demonstrate that God created all material things and immaterial things, and that the immaterial things that we as humans have access to actually point to a, our creator, and that's the whole point, is the acknowledgement of it. It's not so, oh cool, we have these things and now we could really make the distinction between uh, really important discovery about tree trunks, you know um but leading to the getting to the title of this stream is that when you deny uh God, the necessary being to ground all minds, the necessary being, eternal mind to ground all absolutes and particulars, all the things we interact with in order to gain knowledge. When you deny that, you actually deny your own thinking. You deny your own mind. You deny your own personhood. You deny truth, everything you're about to pursue in light of that denial will end up absurd, and that's why it's foolish. It's foolish, because you're borrowing from something totally supernatural, and you're accepting that as the starting point, and then you're denying that that has a justification. That's insanity. That's should be the definition of insanity. Is that you're borrowing the concepts, absolutes, and the unification of those things as an assumption, and then to get to your conclusions, you don't need to justify their existence with anything, but they're mind related, but you're just like, no, they're my mind, it's my mind, my mind's my own mind, and it's not, has nothing to do with some fairy tale god. I don't need a grounding point to unify all absolutes and particulars. I'll make sense of it myself. And it's foolish. It's foolish because you're actually denying, and this is why denial of God will lead to irrational thinking, and lead you to come to believe that certain behaviors are totally fine, or lead you to that you're creating your own truth, man, or it'll justify all sorts of inversion, equating animals with humans, that a cow is a human, that a cow is a person. If you deny the eternal unifying mind creator, you deny the grounding for all absolutes and particulars. And so you can then start playing around and change the identity of things, and you could change the categories of things. That's why atheists make so many category errors. That's why vegans make category errors and make and violate the law of identity, because they're trying to base metaphysical, philosophical claims about knowledge, about oughts, about morality, and they're trying to ground it in strictly pure nature. All the while, they're appealing to some level the immaterial identities we cast upon these things, and that's why an ordered world that has names, that has categories, that has particulars and absolutes, that has sets, that allows us to even use math to isolate an apple as an identity, as a particular, but also identify the apple as a part of a whole category of apples that are not identical to peaches, and so forth. And the fact that our mental capacities and these tools that we have, which are not in nature, are consistent with how the world occurs is nothing short of a miracle. But from the materialist view, the Darwinian, the evolutionist view, the empiricist view, it's just a happy accident. It's just it just happened to be, and they'll say, well, there couldn't have been any other way because then it just wouldn't exist. And so if it does exist, it must necessarily be the case that, you know, the unity between metaphysical immaterial concepts like math, laws of logic, all of these things just are united. They're seamless with the material world and how it occurs to us, and seamless with our mind's ability to process both of them. Which got me thinking more about miracles, and I've mentioned this before. I feel like that we can really establish a really unique trap for the atheist materialist in respect to miracles, because if we can get them to agree that a miracle, or get them to define a miracle in their terms, not in the theistic terms, but in their terms, a miracle would be something like, well, here's a definition that would work for a trap: is that maybe a miracle is an instance of apparent violation or suspension of natural law, physics. So if it's they'll have to say an appearance of it, right? Because they couldn't say it was an actual suspension of the law, because that's all they have to ground what is possible and impossible. And that alone is a trap in itself, because how do you verify what's impossible or possible if your only standard is empiricism? The reason it's a trap is because, is it possible for your mind to interact with immaterial things you can't produce in the physical? And they have to say yes. So that would be miraculous. That's a suspension. Our ability to seamlessly interact with the metaphysical world, basically God's brain, is miraculous according to their definition. But not just that. You can further push them on this, because if they do accept that definition, then it's not the suspension of the regularity of nature that's miraculous. It's that the regularity of nature, in unison with concepts, math, and our experience, and the ability for those things to be transferred and layered onto the physical reality and still work. The fact that there's a place we live that's an operating system that has a function that works consistently, all of these things together, not just the physicality, all of them together, is unjustified by the naturalistic view. The naturalistic view can't account for how it occurs, how it came to be. And that alone, if they accept the definition of miraculous as the suspension of natural physics laws, these things that we observe as law, as effects, the mere existence of a regular system is actually miraculous. It's miraculous because the laws that they're appealing to create the standard for what is a miracle can't justify the existence of all things. That's miraculous. So it's often that the materialist will, even the theist, will appeal to miracle, whether it's a scriptural instance or just in general, the suspension of physics, basically. The suspension of nature's laws of physics. But to me, that's starting from that they exist, right? That's starting from ad hoc, these things exist. The miracle to me is that there's even a standard for someone to call, to even determine a suspension of those things. That the existence of regularity, that these things don't fall apart tomorrow, that these systems stay in repetition. They stay in their locations. There's constants. There's invariance. There's math. There's frequencies. There's octaves. There are absolutes and particulars that are all unified. There are concepts that are unified with the material. There's unity between concepts and material. This alone, according to that definition, if they agree with that definition of a miracle, this alone constitutes a miracle. So it's a contradiction. Existence, according to their worldview, must be accepted as miraculous so far as they accept that definition. And so if you can get them to accept that definition, and I don't see how they could reject that, I don't even see how they can offer an alternative to that definition of miracle. Inevitably, they will, if you just let them define miracle, they will reduce it to what they deem is possible and isn't possible, and the apparent suspension of those things. Bro, I talk like Jordan Peterson. I really don't. Jordan Peterson is full of shit. If I was talking like Jordan Peterson, everything I would have said, I would have followed it with, well, also, some of that's probably not true. And it's like, there's probably an element of, something that doesn't require justification, but we don't know, So I reject that. Jordan Peterson doesn't come to sharp, coherent, definite, necessary conclusions. He's learning to, hopefully. I didn't watch his 4-hour spat with Joe Rogan, but I've been told that he's starting to get to God argument as a necessary being, as opposed to his previous cultural phenomenon of God is a really good avatar to use for your pragmatic life. It's like, so I believe in God because it's useful, it's a useful heuristic, for your life. It's like, if there was there's a game that was popularized in the 90s called Mortal Kombat. It was the first time they really started, using realistic bodies and people in the game. It looked very realistic. I thought that was appropriate. Not only appropriate for the game, but the name of the game was appropriate because it symbolizes life. We are in Mortal Kombat. And it's like, you put the 50 cents in, and you have to choose your avatar. And it's like, if life is Mortal Kombat, it's like, who are you going to choose, bucko? It's like, are you going to choose Liu Kang? That little quick bicycle kick across the screen, forward, down, quarter round to forward, lower kick. Or are you going to choose Johnny Cage, and doing splits and punching people in the balls? It's like, no. It's like, yes, those are all good moves. But it's like, if I'm in the actual game of Mortal Kombat, the best avatar to choose would be someone like Christ, Because, Johnny Cage is Split, or Scorpion's Get Over Here, Or Liu Kang's, or Sonya, I don't even know what she did, But it's like, Christ would transcend those moves, His moves would be metaphysical, miraculous. Dark glasses, Woody, great dream. Thank you. It's like, finish him or don't. It's like, it's mostly true, but not true enough. It's like Raiden wins. It's like, yes. Sonya scissored people. That's hilarious. Oh, hold low down, kick for 5 seconds, then release. I got it. Yeah. It's like Sub-Zero, you know? It's like people looked at Sub-Zero and they thought, well, yes, that's a pretty good move. You know, you freeze people. But I don't think they really got the symbolism of that, you know? It's like, it's like hell being frozen in time, you know? You know, some of us live through life and things are hectic and chaotic and there's a lot of snakes on the plane. And you think, well, if I could just freeze time, that would really help because then I could sort it out, you know? But then you realize that's sort of a Faustian deal, you know? It's because then you're frozen. It's like, whoa, 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 Bucko. It's like it's not what you thought, was it? Jordan's finishing move would be shooting meth in his opponent. That's hilarious. What do I think of Hermeticism? I think that's just basically mysticism. It's not very, it's at some level, it's no longer coherent. Can't really ground what's right or wrong in an eternal, you know. It's just, I'm pretty sure that's like, it's like everything James True is like I believe, some version of that. It's like Hermeticism mixed in a blender with Zedetics. I think it's all a bunch of bullshit. What's your argument on the reality not being fluid? I don't know what you mean by fluid. Like changing, like reality's changing. I think that's self-refuting. Because reality, to call it reality, to be able to distinguish what reality is, it would need to be not changing so you can actually call it something. That's like when people say morality just changes. You're like, what's morality? So, no, I think the fundamentals of existence are in place. And what changes are particulars inside of that fundamental system. But I don't think the system, reality itself, the absolute, changes. It's just things inside of it can change. Peterson, are you a fan of Neil Young? Well, I wouldn't call myself a fan. I would. It's probably better to put it that there are instances of my life that have been sort of cemented in time because of the song playing at that time, you know? It's like whether it was a moment of dancing with my wife or you know, a moment of her holding my hair back when I was puking, you know? It's like you could always possibly recall a song, you know? You know? It's, you know, because I'm still in love with you. I want to see you dance again. Because I'm still in love with you. It's like on this harvest moon, you know? Ah! Ah! It's like on this harvest, you knew. Crow Peterson. What else was I getting to? Oh, I did. Someone, dear Jimbo, much love. Keep crushing. Baldy Bear, thank you. Baldy Bear sent me some some tips in the form of a check. Thank you, Daniel. Really appreciate that. As I move away from my day job and do streams and painting and music and art and all this stuff full on, I'll give people the opportunity to tip me outside of the digital world. Which case you can um, send to Jim Bob at 10940 South Parker Road, number 814, Parker, Colorado 80134. That's my box you can send to. Also, you can send me other things. Obviously, tips are cool, being that I won't have a day job anymore. But I also love when people do some really fun vintage hat stuff. Like this is one of my favorite hats. Someone sent me the Hubble Huggers hat. It's just so funny. And I have a hat rack. So Megan for Christmas had Woodshop Bear make me a custom Jim Bob's hats rack. So it's cool overflowing that thing. Someone mentioned a plasma cutter, and I asked them what plasma was, and they were stumped. Yeah, I know. I was stumped too. I mean, it makes sense. It's like a comic book term. You like the comic book. It was like, oh, he shoots plasma, and then you're like, oh, okay. So if you make electricity and like a lot high heat in a welding format, and it's able to cut through metal, just call that form of electricity plasma. But then you think of plasma, your brain associates it with like some sort of translucent, not quite goo, not fully electric, not totally fluid, something. Lobster claws, Jordan's finishing move. No, Jordan's finishing move is just him tirelessly talking to the person. So it's like the longest finishing move ever. It's like the guy's on his knees and he's all bloody and he's like, "Well, it says finish him." It's like I never asked for any advice. It's like, can I do what I want? That's the question. Now that brings up a question of morality, if there's actual standards, like unmovable, moral prescriptives and duties. It's like brings up a pretty valid question, Paco. And he just keeps going. And there's actually one of those cuts where you see that hours have gone by. And then the guy finally just offs himself because he's so done with it. He's just like, you just killed him with boredom. Depends on what you mean by finish him, It's like, ah! It's like, it's like maybe I should have helped you instead of talking to you to death. That's why that's why I would be so consistent. I always wanted to put Jordan Peterson in It's a Wonderful Life, but it's also a lot of suffering too. And that would be the subtitle, because there's all these moments in there where it'd be so funny because, like, there was that moment he steps on Mary's robe and she hides in the bush. Or no, they're talking and, and the guy on the porch goes, "Why don't you kiss her instead of talking her to death?" It's like, what's that? He said, "Why don't you kiss her instead of talking her to death?" Well, that's a good point. It's like, what is a kiss, though? It brings up a good question. Depends on what you mean by kiss. It's like, please don't hit my sore ear again. And then he works for the chemist dude, the drug dude, and the guy thinks he stole meth as a kid, and he smacks him. "What are you doing? What are you doing, Jordan?" Ah, and he smacks him in the ear. He's like, "I'm sorry, I really didn't take the meth pills. Please don't hit my sore ear again." Oh, there's so many moments in that movie. It's like, don't you know me? Oh, look, Zuzu's pedals. It's like, fuck. It's like every time a bell rings, a metaphysical being gets a jabby jab. It's like every time a bell rings, an angel gets its wings, or not. And like Zuzu's just like, JP impression is getting old. Okay. Well, I'll handled. Daniel G. Or not. Or you can just get the fuck out of the chat. Daniel G was timed out Made by Jim Bob for 300 seconds. What? 300 seconds? Weird. Arbitrary. What is that? What?
This thing's getting old.
That kind of like complaint is just like an old lady. It's like an old lady in a seat being like,
I'm done looking at the flowers. Paul, I'm done with the flowers over here.
And then like the helper comes by and just redirects her to some other direction. Who cares? Yeah, their Dan needs to clean his room. Yeah, those are just gamma males. That they're just reacting to their last thread of Dingleberry thread they have attached to that guy. Where they're just like, can you stop for a little bit? Every time a 300-second timeout passes, an angel gets its wings. Daniel, these animals are getting boring. But honey, we're at the zoo exactly. No, the impression's funny because it changes. It can't get old because it would have been old last week if suddenly a crow didn't appear. Ben, have you ever banned a listener? No, I actually don't ban anybody, but I have a long list of people that work for me that do all the banning for me, and that's the way to do it. It's like I know moderators that don't even know that I don't even know. I mean, there are moderators that know me that I don't even know. They're just a number to me. I mean, that is not to say I'm not pro free speech, but it brings up the question is whether deleting people or banning people or putting them in a 300-second timeout is actually an expression of free speech, and I would argue that it is. I mean, people can confuse free speech with let people talk, and that is just not the case. I mean, free speech is at a cultural level. If you want to take the colloquial take on it, so that would be a decent definition. But if you want to get rigorous in law, I mean, free speech has everything to do with the government and the government's ability to shut you down what you say, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, and these kind of things. People think free speech is like, Facebook's violating free speech, and it cannot be the case. Jordan B for Blackbird. At the end, Jordan is not sure if he actually witnessed a vision from God or he just had a psychotic. That's really accurate, Hexbear, by the way. He's the type of mind that even if, like in they showed the pharaohs the snakes, and then the pharaohs were like, we could do that trick too. He's the type that will see a miracle and he couldn't help but over intellectualize it as a explanation. He just couldn't just accept the humility of it. Richard Tykov, 333 seconds. I would love to customize. You probably can customize it. I mean, has it been 300 seconds? It's just the funniest thing. 300 seconds. Someone actually, there was like a team, and they were like 300, and Sally was like, "I'm so tired. I say 275, and it's just because I'm a girl, and Peter has been working here less than me, and 300 sounds better. Why is that?" Mm. Crow Peterson. I should make a sticker of him. I mean, it's so not wide, broad. It's not a broad idea. People wouldn't know what the hell to think of it. Oh, there'd only be like 30 of us. But if like Peterson, his just head was on a crow as a sticker, would be hilarious. Neil Young just canceled himself. Yeah, he's an idiot. I mean, people told me I hadn't followed him in a while. But people were saying, yeah, well, he look at his some of his Instagram. He was like, kissing his wife with his giant mask on and whatnot. You know, so he already bought into all of it. It's 360. It's 300 seconds because the programmer was going to type 500. We couldn't figure out how many minutes. The crow song's getting better. Oh yeah, Hoodly Daddle's making a crow song that's really hilarious. I think I have to. That's something I might need to like, because now that I have the deep fake tech, a lot of the stuff can go transition immediately, basically the same day, into deep fake. But some of these things might require um, some going back to the cartooning a little bit. It would be funny. I don't know. It's just so weird the thought of Peterson talking to a crow, and then like you know he feels like he could make a connection if he just makes the same sound. He's alone in his office. I'd rather watch Joe Rogan here than hear Neil Young re. Yeah, he should probably just go on Joe Rogan. But again, a lot of this stuff, it's not. I don't even think it's like orchestrated, but it always still has a negative impact toward not truth. And here's why. It's like Neil Young, the embodiment of culture and freedom for generations, is now the wimp, masked vax wimp. But then Joe is still the hero. It's like, for some reason, all of these things end up placing Joe as like the one fighting the good fight. And it's like, that's also wrong. That's not right. It's not true anyway. Um oh, speaking of true, um I was thinking about, Hegelian dialectic, the whole uh there's a problem, people presenting the problem also sell the solution. That makes sense to us. But through that conversation earlier this morning I had with David Patrick Harry, and rejecting truth, and the fact that the more degenerate and immoral your activity is, the more blind you are to certain paradigmatic truths, even like basic lies and things like this. Um, and and then I thought about that methodology of controlling people, and how there's always an emergency, right? There's always a war on something. There's always some scarcity driven narrative. Your life is in danger. It's on and on and on. It's basically just like the fight out, the war on terrorism, except with everything, war on everything. And I realized that there was an added thing to the Hegelian methodology that I missed. and I may have touched on it before, but didn't come so clearly. Is that given a circumstance, even if it's fake, a narrative that puts someone in the position of fear, puts someone in a position of reacting to the potential of scarcity or death or whatnot. It's easier for them to choose whatever is just pragmatic at the time. And so Hegelian dialectic and control isn't just about selling the 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 problem and the remedy, and that's it. It actually sells the problem and then puts people in a position to act pragmatically. And so their pragmatism takes over, and that's what allows them to choose what seems to be the adequate solution. It's not just the solution is offered, because there's many other things you can, given your worldview or what's going on, there could be a lot of different ways to approach what's a problem, including determining if it's whether it's actually a problem or not. That's the best approach. Is determining, is this actually a problem? How much of it is nonsense? That's the rational approach. But it's crazy. It's a crazy trick, because if you push people into a corner where they have to respond because they really do think there's something happening, and so their actions are always consistent with how the world's occurring to them. If you convince them that the world's occurring a certain way, they will act in response to that the most pragmatic way they can. It's not, a lot of people won't react the most spiritually consistent way. That is to say, what is pragmatic as a response, or what's useful, actually isn't always consistent with what's moral. And what's moral, standing up to lies, canceling vax venues, Jordan Peterson, what's moral and what's on the side of truth isn't always pragmatic. The two of them aren't the same a lot of times. Sometimes doing what's right is pragmatic in the long run or in the short term, but those two aren't identical. And I just realized that if you could get people reacting in their pragmatic mind, which is actually the animal mind, because what makes us not animals is our ability to interact with higher levels of truth, like morality and goodness, or whether you're consistent with the values that you espouse. And so in those moments, what looks to be rational based on utility and survival even or whatnot, a lot of times won't be at all consistent with your convictions. So it's not just the problem reaction solution. It's that it's that false scarcity appeals to the animal side, and the animal side expresses itself in some form of pragmatism. Because animals are pragmatic. Animals, when they need something, they don't also waste the time having a long conversation and then they like get into whether stars are real or not, and like whether Jordan Peterson is consistent, and like if you understood a meme or not. Like, animals don't intervene with their needs to tend to matters of truth. But if you can get humans to act like animals in that regard, you already kind of have them in your possession in a way. Triggering our survival instinct creates shortcut to our primal emotions. Yeah, this is like, I mean, it goes back to the snake in the garden. I mean, that's all it is. Oh, there's a problem? Oh, yeah, there's a problem. This could be yours. Like, you could do it your way. No, I did it my way. I think Frank Sinatra was actually a demon. Like, I Did It My Way is basically about the Garden of Eden. No, no, no. No, no, no. No, no, no. No, no, no. Jim Bob, do you ever hear Vox's new song? Yeah, it's hilarious. What is Hegelian dialectic? I think someone covered. In short, Joanna said it: problem, reaction, solution. It's old. It's an old method. It's really just it's a mind control method. It's a political method. It's a marketing method, and it works. Same for Dean Martin. They're all kind of just in this dark world. Matthew, $7. Thank you. Yeah. What's your take on modern pop music? I really just don't even listen to it. I think it's all demonic. The whole system of music itself has been, overtaken by demonic forces. They know what they're doing. And they know it goes all the way back in time. Like, it's not an accident that Lucifer is the what do you call it? What's the word, you guys? Something of music. Minister. He's the minister of music. And that music, an immaterial, supernatural force given to us. It's a way to our soul. That's why singing and being joyful is a command of God. Well, if that's a command of God, you could invert that. You could subvert what that is. You could get people to believe that they're actually pursuing their godly nature in them to be joyful and sing, but they're actually singing fucking Beyonce and her Crooked Eye. Some bullshit, demonic shit from Beyonce. And they become, it's easy to get into idolatry because, the difference between a lot of churches, but not all, some churches have already taken up this approach to idolatry where they make the singers and the lead, I'm a worship hero or whatever they call it. It's like they make them the celebrity. They make them the idol, as opposed to these are just conduits for God. You yourself are equal to them. Just because they're on a stage, you're all singing and rejoicing and worshiping because it's for you. But if you go to a concert, modern pop, it's very clear who's being presented as the idol, what is the congregation, and what the religion is. And it's one of the most sort of vulnerable. You know how dragons have a weak patch? That's like humanity's weak patch. Is that music is really an amazing direct access to the spirit, unity with God, communion. But because of that, it's also a weakness, a weak spot. You know what I mean? It's like it's the flip of the hand is that it's also a vulnerability, and so that means someone else can sequester that opening in us and streamline, literally streamline demonic shit, just demonic. And that's what they do. And they not only do it, but they do it in such a mechanical way where they purposely raise these kids, Miley Cyrus, what's her name, Katy Perry, all these people. A bunch of them start as gospel singers, wholesome, even the demon black dude. wholesome country. They attack country a little now. They get them in there, wholesome. Get the young kids, get the kids, because the parents are then like, oh, that's wholesome. I'll let my kid listen to that. That's great. Oh, great, that's wholesome. Year passes. Oh, that's great. That's wholesome. Oh, yeah, yeah. Look, oh, she's becoming a woman now. I mean, okay, it's not a big deal. It's like she's got to do something with her boobs. Okay, and then it's like Miley Cyrus goes for a transformation. And again, it's consistent with our rebellious nature. It's not like it doesn't happen anyway. Us as kids, wholesome, wholesome, wholesome. Teenager, I'm smarter. I have a mind, not your mind. It's not God's mind. It's my mind. It's my mind. And then we rebel. And we think we're rebelling against our parents. We're actually rebelling against God and the hierarchy of all things. We're rebelling against traditions, structures out there in the world. If we could just change this, that's why I'm voting for Bernie Sanders. He's going to change all the structures. And we think we're arguing in these like little fucking political ways, and we're not. It's all a big spiritual battle. But they take the Cyruses and the Katy Perrys, and then suddenly they're flopping their tits on Sesame Street. And then you're like, wait a second. Can I still? No, that's not wholesome. Wait, now I'm confused. So can my kids still listen to this? I mean, she used to be pretty just decent. Like one of her videos was just like a picnic, and they were at church, and there was like a pickup truck. And now she's riding a banana dildo. Hmm. Huh. And then what happens is when the kids get older, they rebel parallel with their idol, right? So they're in the war with them. And the mom's like, "You're not going out to that place." And she's like, "You don't even fucking understand me. You don't understand how parallel my life is to Miley Cyrus right now. It's like this is a movement. I was born this way. I was born this way." And the mom's like, "Did you just quote Lady Gaga?" "Yeah, she's written more shit than you have." Fucking mom. And then you see how it works. Because it's not just some business system, it's a spiritual system. It's not just the business that just makes money, yeah. It's a spiritual system that they can get into and hijack, and it's in us. It's forever. It's always there. It's always consistent. Yeah, but I was born this way. I was born this way. You weren't. You were born with a dick, and now you say you want to cut it off. You were born this way. I was born this way. I was born this way. And baby, cut your dick off. What? That's totally inconsistent. Doesn't even make sense. So wait, celebrate that we were born a certain way, but also chop your dick off. What? Lady Dada? I was born this way. I was born this way. Love yourself. You were born this way. Also cut your dick off. What? Then they buy purple hair dye. I saw a funny meme. It was like, the venomous and poisonous animals in the animal kingdom, in nature, they often warn their evolutionarily. They warn their predators, and with bright colors, bright, sharp, bright colors. And then the next frame is just like this, like gnarly looking feminist with bright hair, and like a neon like earplug. You're like, wow, it's really consistent. Like humans are not animals, but if you convince a human that they're an animal, they actually will express similar traits as animals. You were born this way, you were born this way. Change everything about you, you were born this way. I'm Lady Gaga, and I just want to push people to just accept who they are, and they were born a certain way, and it's all about acceptance of who you are. And by accepting, I mean totally reject who you are and how you were born and alter it with knives. Yeah, it's a spiritual thing. I mean, it's the same thing. It's the same thing as the reason the Hegelian thing works is that it appeals to that part of the human that values something that's, wants to make the right choice. You know, there's an ideology or philosophy being prodded. And so none of this world is separate from that. There's nothing that's just strictly mechanically things occurring the way it does in nature. There's nothing that's just occurring. Maybe when we go to the bathroom. Maybe that's about it. Or just our body in motion and the things operating inside of our body, the physicality and the movements and the things that are changing or whatnot. But everything outside culturally, nothing out there is independent of all of this spiritual these layers that don't prod at or appeal to or question them or persuade them. And I really think at the higher levels they know this. They're not. This is what's so crazy, is that at the highest levels of manipulation of the people at the soundboards pulling plugs, and the old footage, the lady at the operating system is stopping one thing from coming through, making another thing come through, stopping another communication from coming through. They're like that. They're not the irony of it is that maybe their followers are godless. Nobody's godless, but you know what I mean. They're godless people, and they're just droning around serving some material function. But their orchestrators, their engineers, are actually not. They accept and understand the spiritual nature of our existence, and they buy into it and they manipulate it. They're not just these godless technocrats. Some of them are, not some of them are just, you know, they think, but they can't be. This is why this book is so important. The myth of religious neutrality is because even a Klaus Schwab who wants this, a reformatting of what it is to be human, there's still always a religious fundamental telos, a view of where we ought to go, a higher metaphysical philosophy that it's attempted to be grounded in. It's not just, just do it because, willy nilly, we're just following nature. No, there's a philosophy. There's a right and a wrong in their view. There's a let's connect the world up. Let's create the bodies of the internet of bodies. Let's make your body itself an internet. Like, to argue for these things, you're never neutral. You're never neutral. And that's why for us to only strawman people as just godless naturalists, that's actually not always the case. They might have an incoherent view, but a lot of people who we might think are just, these materialists or whatever, that they actually do have a fundamental philosophy. And if you could draw it out of them and have them say it clearly, you can use logic, coherency to dismantle it. What are your thoughts on reincarnation? I don't believe in reincarnation. What's the book title? It's called The Myth of Religious Neutrality. It's by Roy Clauser. Roy Clauser. And the subtitle's an essay on the hidden role of religious belief in theories. So really, it's just a really in-depth overview of how all views are theory laden. All philosophies assume some sort of metaphysics, epistemology, and morality, and that no one's actually neutral. An atheist likes to be like, "No, I'm neutral. I mean, I don't know for certain there's no God, but I'm just not convinced that there is, and that's just, it's like if I'm not convinced of unicorns, do you have to have a name for that?" And you're like, "No." But we're not taught unicorns. The argument for unicorns isn't that it's the necessary being to unify all absolutes and particulars, morality, like all of these things, logic, that such that the world can be coherent and intelligible. Um, the consequence of their imagined neutrality, the atheist, they have to reason that the only reason why they reject God is because their first principle is materialism. And that's why I always say any argument against the existence of God can be used against the existence of truth itself, because the materialist cannot justify truth because it's an immaterial absolute. It's not found in a tree or a body or a brain. It's not my toenail. And so that's why they're not neutral, because their fundamental starting position is that materialism, empiricism, naturalism, science is the ultimate that provides what is and isn't possible. Of course, from that view, you can take them down that road and you can find them in a inconsistency, because ultimately their verification process is their own mind. Why? Because if science is the ultimate arbiter source of truth, the things required for science that are all assumed, immaterial, meaning, laws of logic, numbers, words, mathematics, all these things have to be in place. Science itself, what they deem is the standard for knowing whether something's reasonable or not, uses a bunch of shit that's totally unreasonable according to their standard. It's like, oh, science is the ultimate. I mean, I don't believe anything if it's not scientifically demonstrated and provable. Okay, how about all the things that you need to use to do science that can't be demonstrated or provable? Yeah, but those are just. I see what you're doing. You're playing a word game. No. No, you can't do science without assuming a bunch of other metaphysical things. Sorry. It's not my opinion. That's why it's a myth. There's no neutrality, because everyone presupposes immaterial absolute things. Just some of us, the atheists, not me, they say that they don't need to justify them because they call them axiomatic. Yeah, but they're axiomatic. What does that mean? Well, they just are, and you don't question them, and we don't question them, or we don't need to justify them. Well, as I talked with David Patrick Harry, if an axiom is defined as something that's self-evident and true, such that it's necessary for all other things to be pursued or discerned, any form of knowledge, so you just have to accept laws of logic are true because it's useful in discussing further truth. Well, that can't be the only reason, because laws of logic are true regardless if you want to discuss things or not. They're not true because of their usefulness. They're useful because they're true, but they're not true because they're useful. So saying, oh, that's an axiom, are you so silly? I mean, this is like philosophy 101. Axioms don't need justification. And I'm like, so that's another axiom? And they're like, what do you mean? Okay, if an axiom is something that's taken to be true for the purposes of usefulness, argumentation, and and you're saying they also don't need justification. Well, they don't need justification is another axiom. So your axiom, it's contradiction that you're saying something's doesn't need to be justified, but saying that it doesn't need to be justified is an attempt to justify them. And so it also assumes that there's absolute truth. So by what standard in your scientific empiricist model, what scientific experiment demonstrates or proves that axioms don't need justification? And if it's absolutely true that axioms don't need justification, that means there's something previous to axioms that allow for that statement to be true. And this is what they fundamentally don't get. They just don't understand that when you make an absolute claim, you're assuming there's something that precedes the process by which you came to that conclusion. When you say an absolute claim, like axioms don't need justification, you're assuming absolute truths exist which need justification. But those truths that actually need justification, in order to come to the conclusion that axioms don't need justification, you need a justification for that. It's just begging the question over and over again. Their axioms are ad hoc. All axioms end up being ad hoc. I mean, I don't know where this all started. I think it's like the Enlightenment or something, where they were just like, you guys, I'm so tired of trying to justify the fact that we can think and reason, and why thinking and reasoning and mathematics and words and the language and laws of logic are somehow seamlessly transplanted on the natural world and consistent with our mind. So there's these metaphysic things that hold their truths and their laws, and then there's the natural world that holds its truth and laws. But the natural world will hold its truth regardless of our ability to describe it. And the immaterial laws of logic will hold their absolute truth and their unmovable nature, regardless of what happens in the physical world. And our ability to see those two things, one physical, one not physical, is also is dependent on our mind. But they can't be identical to our mind because that's just solipsism. And I don't know where it was. They just stopped thinking about this. They're just like, oh, I don't want to. I just don't want to anymore. Can we just get to the Constitution already? What does ad hoc mean? It means just like out of convenience. Out of, just say it. It's just convenient to just have it. A logic exists. Self-evident. That's the other thing I discussed is like a materialist who says something self-evident, but they're talking about an immaterial thing. It's not self-evident. I mean, based on their determination of what their definition of evidence, how can the laws of logic, meaning the fact that beingness, being, how can this be self-evident? What? Self-evident? Even the term itself, self-evident. Who's the self? Who's the self? Who's the self of laws of logic? I mean, you could say, you could probably, temporarily, first premise, get away with, it's self-evident to me that I exist. You could say, based on my experience, it's evident by me, self. But the laws of logic are not self-evident. They exist, but there's no evidence. And they exist regardless if you identify them or abide by them. Ad hoc is like on the spot. Yeah, right on the spot. Back to work. See a 2-acre bear. But I mean, the larger issue is always the preconditions, and that our existence relies on the unity between absolutes and particulars by categories and things within the categories, that things hold their identity over time and they're not identical to other things that hold identity over time. The workability of the external world and how it's observed, how it's mirrored with the laws of logic in the way we describe them and name them. And then there's information, whole other thing. I'm still going to wait for the materialist people in my who troll my my YouTube in the comments to give me one example of information that's material. They will not, because it's impossible. There's no such thing. Anyway, it'd be interesting to hear your logical deduction about reincarnation. Well, I mean, reincarnation is endless regress. Incarnation to what? It's like how far back, it's like, and what, into what? Reincarnation of just people? I think this fundamentally at least goes against my theology that you have a soul and that you're given a temporal life. That's where it comes into contradiction with my views, is that it assumes a near eternal state of existence in the physical. So reincarnation assumes an eternal aspect of temporal existence. Temporal, we have one life, it's a gift. That gift gives us the ability to use free will and choice to operate consistent with our Creator's commands and will, or not. And then, reincarnation is like, what is it? Is it a penalty? Would it be a penalty? And if you're a reincarnation of something before, does it go this way or does it go backwards? It takes away judgment. It basically removes the whole concept of judgment. It also assumes some form of punishment, that we can fully understand what it's like to be a chipmunk. It's like you got reincarnated as a chipmunk, and one person's like, "Yeah, oh man, I feel bad for you. What did you must have done something horrible." And another person's like, "What? No, I mean, I was a chip when I was a chipmunk. It was awesome." So you have this inconsistency of what's the rhyme and reason for any given new embodiment and what it is. I mean, it's not coherent. It just falls apart once you start asking deeper questions. Reincarnation is the hellish loop of the Ouroboros infinity. Yeah. The other thing is you wouldn't know what your new incarnation was, you know? It's like this relies on this assumption of memory that you can invent in your head where you're like, I remember. And to what end? When do you reach, I mean, in the Eastern philosophy and like Vipassana, like, all those gurus are like, you have Sankara, you have one Sankara before you and another Sankara before you. And you are constantly correcting your Sankaras. And you're constantly correcting in every carnation. You remember what you did. And I smell the curry.
And you will sit here in your robe and you'll eat vegetable food forever. Like, well, eh. You know, it basically assumes you're not a unique being and that everybody and every being around you is not actually them. They're just a reincarnation of someone else. And who's the real self? Yeah. My issue with One Life is how is a baby that dies of SIDS judged? Well, we can't tell how a baby's judged. How we have no authority in determining that judgment. But if we're going by the word, it's that they're judged uh, fairly, mercifully. So, I mean, our hunch, given what we know of the God of the Bible, we could probably be correct if we guessed. The guru's voice isn't far from right. Yeah, I know. I need help. I need practice. Order Sankara. Order Sankara. And imagine that your feeling is in your toes. You are not separate from your feeling. Your feeling, whether it's pain or whether it's tickly, whether someone tickles your armpits. It is kind of like her. Is Orthodox Christianity somewhat an pantheism? No, I don't think so. No. Honestly, I just feel I know people are at peace after death, even close friends are very stoic. When a dog passes, I know how to react. I'm not sure. I feel like making tikka masala. I make a pretty damn good butter chicken myself. Oh, oh, oh. You are in. You are. Are you in pain? Are you being pain? Are you having pain? Or are you observing pain? If you observe pain, the pain will come in intermittence. The intermittence of pain represents all of the trauma in your life. And you can keep pain around if you choose to focus. I am floating. I am floating. There can be one God while also being many gods. Still monotheism? I don't think so. There can be one God and many and in several essences. There can be one God with uh, with a multiplicity of of its himself, but that doesn't mean they're multiple. Because multiple gods in the absolute means two eternals, and then from there, you'd have to be like, well, who's got the say? Ayn Rand floating in a vat of borscht. That's hilarious. That'll happen. There'll be like the Ayn Rand Institute on in the metaverse, and it's just a bunch of her heads floating around with her broken teeth, just fucking spitting borscht everywhere. God and gods being entirely different, limitation of language. Yeah, I think it's all meaningless. I mean, you could just, if you wanted, you could just you could just redefine gods as a tree and be like, see, there's many gods. Exactly, Trevor. What's the definition? God would be eternal and absolute, ultimate. and a being, like actual mind. I used to think we relive the same life over and over. Yeah, we can conceptualize that. We can convince ourselves of a lot of things. Um, Especially the past based stuff, because in a way, anything that you fabricate, if there's any level of confirmation in the current existence you're in, it'll feel very much real. So long as it overlaps or to you verifies. It's almost like a false um revelation. It's almost like a Satan driven worldly revelation. But you know why? Because it would be like you're appealing to your mind and your thinking and your concepts like in your head, and you're creating these visuals, and then you're using the world itself as the verification. The world as it is, something happened. But that's not to say that all religions can't do that though. Fall trap to that method. Multiple gods would imply inevitable conflict. Yeah, that's why like paganism, like there's a bunch of gods who they all have different sectors, like they work at it, like NASA, and then they talk and they fight sometimes, and they're like, "You're in my territory, man." And he's like, "Sorry, man, you were sleeping. I saw some shit happening. I thought I'd come over and just you need some oversight. Don't step over my territory, man." So I'm the god of water. You are the god of potatoes. One guy's like, I'm the god of avocados. I'm the god of avocados. You guys, I'm really trying to convince you guys to, lay off the meat and the fishing. You know. I believe spiritual hierarchies reflect material hierarchies. Yeah, it's just all meaningless, Josh. You're not really saying anything. Are you saying the material world precedes spiritual truth? It's a contradiction. And here's why. If you weren't here at the beginning, you can't perceive material hierarchies without assuming metaphysical hierarchies. So it has to be the other way around if you're going to generalize that. That the material could only necessitate the spiritual as an antecedent, because you can't perceive and make sense of material without supernatural uh, abilities. Isn't that crazy? That humans actually made in the image of God and mind have supernatural abilities. And by supernatural, I mean above nature. That's what makes us not animals. Our supernatural ability is to interact with metaphysical concepts, is to make sense in a very distinct, ordered way the world we see, but also make sense of our thoughts independent of the world that we see. It's like I'm the god of avocados. The god of lobster. I'm the god of lobster. It's like it's funny. The irony is that I don't even like lobster. You know, it's like they're literally insects of the sea. They're water bugs. Ah! So material hierarchies reflect spiritual hierarchies. Well, I mean, it's not plural. The only thing that ends up being coherent is that all things, immaterial and material, as one absolute reality, reflect the mind and will of one mind, God, of the eternal, of an eternal being that holds all of it into one unified system. Otherwise, absolutes and particulars wouldn't be able to make sense of them. They would just fall into all these different categories. There would be no intelligibility unless there's a unifying ultimate principle. But the principle can't be material because material doesn't create thoughts. Matter, there's no thoughts out in nature. You can't materialize it. You can't grab it. And so all of the order is a reflection of a single mind, and that makes sense. And that it makes sense that humans are peculiar to the rest of creation because we have access to that mind. We don't have full access. Doesn't mean we can fully understand, but we're at least given, lended, on lease, some of those abilities. I'm too broke for lobster. I think it was true that lobster was the cheaper thing. They used to feed it to poor people and slaves, and then it just got fancy somehow. So we are all one then. We're not all one. We're particulars in an all one absolute creation that necessitates an eternal, separate from creation, God being. So it's not oneness, because we're not all one. We're all particulars. No, it's not oneness. Oneness doesn't make sense because when someone says we're all one, if that was true, the only way they could know that is if they weren't one, looking in on oneness. They would have to observe oneness to claim oneness. And so it's you can't do it. Bono is one with Oprah, pretty much. They all push the same thing. God doesn't claim all is one. Yeah, no, it's not. There's no oneness. I mean, we're dealing with, this is the essence of all of it, is that the multiplicity of existence, absolutes and particulars, categories, sets, and items, things that have an essence that are their own thing, but they're part of another thing. An apple is its own unique apple, has like a different thing about it, but it's not. It's within the set of apples, and so if it didn't have a set, there'd only probably be one apple. Could you say the appleness of an apple if it wasn't in a set? If the apple disappeared, you wouldn't have a set. You wouldn't have an apple. So the two are interlinked. But because the multiplicity of things and the absolutes and particulars exist and they're unified somehow, well, I know how, my belief system, but they're unified and they could be unified because they're conceptual, they're unified with a mind. And because that mind, if we say the unifying being of all absolutes and particulars, all things that are true and possible, is from a mind, then God, being the mind, would also manifest himself as unification of multiplicity. That's why the problem of the one and the many is a problem in all fields in philosophy. It's a problem in nature, how we observe things. But by problem I mean how do we distinguish between absolutes and particulars, sets and items and these things? And how do we make sense of the unity between these? And it can't be just two, because then you're just, that's what David Patrick Harry, if you didn't watch the stream, go to Church of the Eternal Logos and his recent stream we did this morning, because we dissect why multiplicity assumes at least three things. Oh, I gotta go to work. See you, hoodly daddle. Oh yeah. I want to eat Zoidberg. Is that another way of saying Zuckerberg? It's funny. If we're all one, what number am I thinking? Exactly. That's the problem of solipsism. Solipsism is true. I should make that. I mean, solipsism, the word is a little highfalutin, high-minded. But someone going, solipsism is true, and another person saying, I disagree, is hilarious to pretentious philosophy, at least. Philosophy nerds. Zoidberg from Futurama. Oh, he's a lobster? That's funny. Really, Zoidberg. I think they're saying more with that name than what's being talked about. All right. I gotta go. Went over about a half hour. Thanks for the super chats, guys. Again, we'll discuss more. Thank you, Daniel, for the super chat check. Again, if you want to support me, you can send donations of any form, including vintage hats or whatnot, guitar strings. To Jim Bob, made by Jim Bob, 10940 South Parker Road, number 814, Parker, Colorado, 80134. And I appreciate it. You can send me a letter, questions. You could actually write me a question in physical form, and I'll read it on a stream. And aside from that, I hope you had a good stream, and hopefully that one Daniel guy learned his lesson. Maybe he just left after he got put in timeout. But that's the second time. Leave the chat. Nobody cares. All right. See you guys.